Nyajong Shado. October is Mental Health Awareness Month. As Hmong American clinicians, we hope to shed light on mental health awareness and continue to normalize conversations about autism within the Hmong community. As a follow up to episode 7, Raising Autism Awareness, this bonus episode was created as a response to honor the journey that the Hang family has been through and to give a voice to all of the caregivers who are often left out of the equation when immediate triage for behavioral services are given to the child. I want to also give a content warning as we do address suicidal ideation in this episode. We commend Ying and Kang for their honesty and bravery in sharing their journey in hopes that no other parent out there feels alone as they navigate their child's autism diagnosis. Hello and welcome to the Let's Talk About Autism in Hmonglish podcast. For today's bonus episode, it really stemmed from my previous episode, which is episode number 7, Raising Autism Awareness, working with Ying and Kang Hang, sharing their story about their 8-year-old. And in the course of them sharing their story, they share their experience with the mental health aspect of understanding and accepting their son's autism diagnosis. And in the course of doing so, they revealed that they definitely had thoughts of suicide. And I wanted to be sure to fully and respectfully address that topic. And because my scope of practice is behavior analysis, I knew that I could not ethically, and Hakulushiana, I was like, I cannot just move on to my next episode without addressing it in a way that honors their journey. So for today's episode, I've invited Shua Lore, who is a wonderful friend, longtime friend. We've known each other for forever. Who is and she'll remind me again, LICSW from Minnesota. To dive into this topic about mental health of caregivers with me. So welcome to the podcast, Shua.
Hi, Tia. Thank you for asking me to collaborate.
Absolutely. I only know like a handful, I think maybe actually, to be very honest, 2 social workers, mom social workers. And you were one of the 2. And I was like, and of course, I appreciate your support for Withal and just this initiative to bring autism awareness to the Hmong community. And, we've had these conversations about mental health. And I know just from, like I said, it's been so long since we saw each other, but I remember growing up, you were always, if I were to think just in a nutshell, always very, I don't want to say mama because that's not correct either, but I knew I knew Toka Hailuna, unlike myself, okay, because I'm just like which is for better for worse. I don't know if that's a proud trait, but I knew that for you growing up, and it's so amazing to watch you grow into your craft that cái tin nhắn có yung sa to to thì me they cái money high and that's why you're so perfect for your role as a social worker. So I'm just really happy to have your insight and your expertise on this topic. And also, I don't want to forget that this episode is also sponsored by the Carolina Hmong Women's Association, which is spearheaded by a mutual friend of ours, Sindra Yang and Doha. You know Doha, right?
Yes, I do.
Yes, they both are co-founders of that organization in North Carolina, and one of their main initiatives is also mental health awareness and wellness. Right? It's not enough just to be aware, but like, what are some things you can do to find wellness with your mental health? So, thank you guys so much for your sponsorship. But yeah, we're gonna go ahead and dive right into this topic, Shaw. So we were just talking about how we both listened to the episode and how brave, y'all, how courageous of this amazing couple to, when they were finally ready, and I would say at a point where they were healing from the effects of having gone through the last 8 years of that, the struggle of understanding and then accepting their son's autism, but at the same time, their own mental health struggle, the impacts that had on them. And we'll dive into all the different variables, but I'll just go ahead and get started with some of the questions that we were talking about. Many parents of children living with autism are dealing with their own mental health needs, right? Stemming from their own grieving process, some depression, anxiety, stress. So, I had a amazing reader shared too about talking about, and this is such a powerful phrase for me. She said, like, the impact of that continuous grief that parents go through, when they have, our home parents have a child who's diagnosed with a developmental disability. So, how can they seek support and then develop healthy coping skills? Like, what are their options when their immediate support system is not a viable option? Share, right? Like, they are educated among individuals. They are able to access the outside resource, and even then, they were not able to seek immediate support from their support system, right? Whether it was the coordinators or the professionals or their families, right? What do you do next, right? So that's where you come in to share, like, okay, what do you do, right? Because as a parent, first and foremost, you're worried about your child, but then that only goes so far before things catch up, and you're like, oh my gosh, I've got to think about myself. How do I make myself regulate myself into a position to where I can make um, good and healthy decisions for my child?
Yeah, for sure. And first of all, I just wanted to say that I can't imagine like how difficult it must be to raise a child with a disability, especially a disability that you as the parents don't know much about, right?
Right.
And so then the struggle of just exhibiting like the patience and discipline and love while your child continues to press you into you with like challenging behavior day after day, that all can become so overwhelming very quickly. For Yang and Kang, like how brave, how brave of them to want to share their story. And not only that, but the courage that it must have taken for them to be so vulnerable. I
Yeah.
was, just listening to it, I was amazed how vulnerable they were in expressing how they were feeling at the time, what was
Hmm.
occurring at the time. Um, so yeah, so it's wonderful that they were able to share their story because I'm sure that there were lots of listeners out there that it resonated really, deeply with
Yes.
as well. But I think going back to your question, I think I want to just touch briefly on the process of grief and loss
Yes.
and learning to accept, their child's disability. I think with every parent has hopes and dreams, right? Hopes and
Hmm.
dreams for their child. And maybe they're big dreams, like, like seeing them graduate from college or and getting their dream job, or even like simple ones like chasing them around the park, or, like getting a video of
Hmm.
the first steps, the first words. And then when you realize that your child has a disability, some of your dreams might look different than what you thought, um,
Right.
or they might not come true at all. Um, and I think dealing with the loss of hopes and dreams is a lot like the grief process people go through when a loved one dies. Um, you might, wonder if it's okay for you to even feel this grief because your child is still here and
Hmm.
they still need, and they still need your care. And so it could be all very confusing. And you can experience just like what Yang and Kang had discussed, like the feelings of anger and sadness and guilt and the shame and the
Hmm.
fear of it all. And then it leaves you feeling just like helpless because you can't help your child. I think that's where
Right.
a lot of the grief comes from as well. And then you might go from like one feeling to the next, or you can feel it all together at the same time, which
Hmm.
again, it becomes very overwhelming.
Right.
And then the normal way that you usually deal with your emotions may no longer work or may no longer be helpful in that situation. And then, of course, and that may be time to learn new coping.
So,
Yeah,
the 5 stages of grief is not linear because, you can and it's not like you have to go through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can start at 5, come to 1, 3, 4, 2, revisit 1 again, go back to 5, right? And so
correct.
I think that's what makes it so hard because you never feel like, "Oh, am I done with it?" Because maybe the honest truth is that you never really are. You're always in some stage of it, right? At some point.
And I think that what makes it hard too, especially when it's both of you, right? Like you and your
Mhm.
spouse, you're both going through it at the same time, but you can be at different stages. And
Yeah. Yeah, like,
it
how
complicates.
much more
Hmm.
complex that makes the whole situation, y'all.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, we talked about like the physical, emotional, and mental stress of raising a child who has autism is challenging. And then imagine it's your first child. And like you said, you had all these hopes and dreams, and then it just all with that diagnosis comes tumbling down. But like in their situation, it took a long time for them to even get that diagnosis, but leading up to it, right? So even
Yeah.
with you get professional support and you get support from your family in one way or another, right? Because they see your child and they know that something's amiss and that you might need support.
Hmm.
So whether or not you get that. But in our home community though, we see that there is this framework of self-blaming and shame. It's so prevalent. And then, we also talk about when it comes to shame, guilt and shame, how do we give ourselves grace and love in who we are and what we do? And then also, how can our community help alleviate some of that pain? Because how do you overcome these deeply ingrained mindsets in order to tackle your own mental health aside from navigating your child's diagnosis and prescribed treatment, right? Because what if you yourself don't believe in autism or you don't think that it exists?
Oh, that's such a tough one, Tia. It's such a tough one because it is so ingrained in who we are
Hmm.
as a community, right? But I think it's important I think in order to answer this question, I think it's important that we understand where our parents' coping skills come from. To me, that's how it would make sense for me,
Okay.
and by understanding where it comes from, I think it also allows us to um, see it from perspective of compassion for our parents
Okay.
too. Just quickly, like coping skills, just to explain that really quickly.
Yes. Yes.
Coping skills are, patterns and behaviors that we fall back on to try to deal with stressful situations, right? And we learn coping skills from our parents or caregivers
Hmm.
at a very, very young age. I mean, as far back as when we're an infant in their arms, like
Yeah.
just, and then we see and we see how our parents and the caregivers around us deal with their emotions.
Hmm.
And
Stress,
for
stressful situations.
yes, absolutely. And for most of us, I think our parents are refugees.
Yes.
So the coping skills that they've learned are for survival purposes, right?
Yes. Yep.
And their trauma, for like, their trauma isn't a weakness or a fault in their character. It's just like that their bodies are hardwired
Hmm.
for survivalist response because of what they went through, during the war,
Yep.
post-war, and because of that, like some of the skills that they taught us just don't always translate into the present day now for us.
Hmm.
Um, so because of that, like we have to intentionally learn healthy coping skills in order to regulate our emotions so that we're able to help our children, right?
Right.
So we can't take the coping skills that were passed down to us from our parents and utilize those coping skills and hoping that that will work in
Right.
in our whatever we're dealing with now. And if we're in our specific example here is um, how can we regulate our emotions, learning new coping skills so that we can actually then help our children. Because if we can't regulate our own emotions and we have outbursts, it's outbursts
Hmm.
against outbursts. It's not,
Right.
it's not helpful. But with that said, so to answer your question of like blaming, shame in our community, like how do we overcome these deeply ingrained mindsets, right?
Hmm.
Um, and again, I think to answer this before we answering this question, I think it's also again it's important to understand how the Hmong community works, right? And I think A myth in the Hmong community is that self-sacrifice leads to a better outcome. And I would describe the Hmong community as collectivism,
Yes.
where the needs of family overpowers the needs of the individual. Putting family before yourself is seen as like a true indicator of your love and devotion,
Yes.
right, to your family.
Yes.
And so I think it's important to understand like where this belief comes from. And for the Hmong community, I think the family is the tie to our culture. It's actually hard to distinguish between the two, like culture and religion, and and it's actually the reason why they left their home countries. And Hmong families become more enmeshed and dependent on each other because they're really all that they have in this new country,
Right.
in comparison to what their lives back in their home country. And for our parents, like codependency
Mm-hmm.
means is a means of survival, right?
Yeah.
Where it's we have to depend on each other in order to survive. And and I think, and with being raised in a culture of codependency, um, that's the ingrained mindset. That's what we're talking about here is that's the ingrained mindset of how do we get out of that mindset, right? Because it's not, and the truth is the hard truth. Yeah, the hard truth is that it's not the culture that has to change, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's it's only you that can change how you're affected by it.
Right.
And I think when you are in it, it's so hard, like it's so difficult to make any different decisions outside of the norm,
Yes.
because our culture doesn't, um, we don't support individualism, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
it's more of conformity.
Yes.
You're do as you're told,
Mm-hmm.
and this has been taught since we were very young. So, and then we carry that codependency um, with us into all of our relationships,
Mm-hmm.
friendships, and I think what you have to work on is come to a point of to come to a point where it's okay, to feel okay for you to make decisions
Mm-hmm.
for your family that decisions where your family or like just your parents or the community may not approve of. Um,
Right.
Come to a point where it's okay for you to let go of some family obligations because you need some rest,
Right.
and there will be lots of feelings of guilt and shame involved as like you're making these changes, and
Mm-hmm.
that's where seeking therapy can help.
Yeah.
You know.
And before we dive into that, though, Shua, I want to say everything you're saying, I'm like literally over here shaking my head, agreeing because imagine you realize all that, right? Everything you just said, it makes sense. It sounds so easy, y'all. Just make decisions
Mm-hmm.
that's best for you. But when you are raised in this culture where as a young child, like you said, even as a toddler, into a full blown adult, but all you've ever known is parents and aunties and uncles and grandparents and cousins who are just like, we all have that. I don't want to say unhealthy, but that codependency on each other. Sometimes it can be codependency, it can be unhealthy, right? Where you
Mm-hmm.
can't even make one move without getting everyone's approval. What happens when your child has, a diagnosis like autism that no one has ever encountered before and no one knows what to say? No one has a solution. The only solution is don't think about it. It'll go
Mm-hmm.
away. It'll get better. And then you're going, okay, you're biding your time. Oh my gosh, 5 years old, still hailu. What next? What else? What do you have for me next? And no one has the answer, right? And then as a parent, at this point, you're going, but I should know best. And if I don't, they'll know best. But what if they don't? What if they don't have an
Mm-hmm.
answer for me either? But then I rely on them because that's what I was taught to do is to rely on my elders to make decisions for me that's best for me because but then at this point you're going, but they don't. In fact, they're telling me to do the opposite of what I feel like My outside resources are telling me to, and I know that I should, but I can't because of one, that guilt and that shame, right? So it's that inner struggle where you're going, do I listen to what I feel like my gut is telling me to do, to seek services for my child and for myself because we need that? Or do I listen to Allah, who I revere and respect so much because they've always guided me toward the light, right? But at this one
Hmm.
juncture in my life now, I don't know what to do, right? So I think that's where that guilt and shame, that struggle comes in with going, who do I seek advice from if the people who have always guided me are no longer guiding me to where I feel like I need assistance with, right? So psychotherapy, right? And talk therapy. Tell me more about that and how does that work?
I wanted to just point out too, Tia, that like the What Thou Facebook group that
Yeah.
you've created, which is amazing,
Thank
um,
you.
and it's so needed in our
Yeah.
community. But I some of the patterns, or at least like some posts that
Hmm.
can, has a certain theme, and one of the things that I've seen is where they're posting about how the question is like, I see that when we go to relatives' house or we
Hmm.
get to go to get-togethers, you know, aunts and uncles and some relatives just don't understand my
Yeah.
child, um,
Yeah.
and because of that, I see that they're treating him, they're saying things to him that hurts him, therefore it hurts me, and I'm
Hmm.
trying to advocate for my child, but they continue to do it every time that we see them. What can I do,
Hmm.
right? and
Hmm.
um and and I think, again, that's so difficult, right? Because you want to feel accepted, you don't want to, you want to feel accepted by your family, you want things to continue to be the same,
Yes.
where how it used to be. But I think as a parent, like, you have to make the hard decision, right? Where it's, if I see that this is doing more harm to my child and doing more harm for me, like, it mean
Yeah.
is the situation doesn't make me feel good. It actually adds on more stress, for me and my child and my family than it is helping. And
Right.
I think, you have to, in order to actually just make a change, you have to make that decision. It's a hard decision. And it's not easy, but I think it starts with making that decision of, I'm the parent and I know what's best for my child, right?
Yes.
And in autism, it's like, if I'm educated and and I know how to read and write and I'm able to Google and research my own stuff about autism,
Hmm.
and my parents can't, right? It's a new thing for all of us, but I can educate myself in it, and I can see that it's hard for my parents to, or my family to accept and understand what it is. I have to make that decision. So I just
Absolutely.
wanted to point that out, that was a
Yeah.
common theme that I've been seeing on those posts. Your question was, what is mental health therapy, right? And
Hmm.
how does it help you?
Yes.
It's I think, I like to say, like, mental health, like, our mental health affects, like, how we think, how we feel, how we act. Um, and it also really determines, like, how we handle stress and how
Yeah.
we relate to other people. And it also, and how we make healthy choices. Mental health therapy or psychotherapy refers to techniques that help people change behaviors, thoughts, and emotions that cause problems or distress in your lives. That when you're meeting with a licensed therapist, because a lot of people I hear also say, like, I mean, why do I need to see a therapist if I can just vent to my friends,
Hmm.
right? And there's a big difference between the two. I
All
think
right. Yeah.
venting itself is great. Venting is great when especially if you have somebody, a friend or a loved one, that is supportive and one is willing to listen to you. I think it's great. However, like, the difference between the two is that I think by seeing a therapist, one, they are licensed, and they're trained to do this. And it also provides, like, a safe and confidential place that allows you to open up, not to feel judged or scared that information will be leaked, right? Because I think that's a really important thing to point out to our Hmong community, because the Hmong communities are so small, you know,
Hmm.
that, and we all know each other, right? Or at least know of each other.
Right.
And I think that makes it hard for people to want to actually be willing to open up, because it's the fear of, what if I talk about my deepest fears, um, would that be discussed with somebody else, or somehow would it lead back to my family, right?
Right.
And I think by seeing so by seeing a licensed therapist, there are confidentiality policies uh, and laws in place,
Yes.
where you know that everything that you discuss will not be shared outside of your session. Um, and and then your therapist will work with you on creating a treatment plan. That includes like goals and also like how to reach those goals, and they'll support you in that journey.
Mhm.
It's a process. I think that's what I should say.
Mhm.
It's a process. And I want it, but I also just want to add in there that again, like therapy is a process. So I don't want it to sound like, as long as you go and see a therapist for one or, two sessions, that suddenly all your problems will be solved.
Right. Right.
It's, it takes dedication. And, of course, like anything else in your life, like to make lasting changes, like you
Mhm.
have to put the work in it. You have to do the work.
Yeah, and I kind of, imagined it like, as we go through life, we just throw so much in our bags, y'all. We throw things in our
Mm-hmm.
backpack. We carry so much on our hearts, on our shoulders. And when you go to therapy, I like to call it unpacking. You unpack all those things,
Mm-hmm.
unpack it with your therapist, right? And
Yes.
hey, what am I feeling? What's heavy on my heart today? Hey, let's unpack this. And then
Yes.
you realize, oh my gosh, in the process of doing, you're like, I didn't realize I had that much to say. And then hopefully, when it's effective, you leave feeling like, all right, I can leave that there, or I know how to cope with that when it comes up again, right? So
Yes.
unpacking things. So yeah, so how does someone know when they should seek therapy? And can you provide some signs to look for, like when you can make that determination, like, okay, I think I need help, and I need to seek a therapist to help me with this.
Yeah, that's a great question. And, you know, I think some, we, again, like you said, like in life, like some of we get challenges all the time. Things happen
Mhm.
all the time.
Yep.
And some of these challenges that we face in life will be greater than others. Um,
Yes.
and sometimes we'll be able to tackle them on our own, or with the help of a friend or family. But other times we could benefit from the help of a professional, right? And while it's never too early to get additional support of a therapist, I think the moment that it feels like it's just too much to handle, or you're worried if you're going about things the right way, I think that's when it's time for you to get some help. And some signs like to look for are like just poor sleeping, not
Mhm.
getting enough sleep. Um, just loss of interest in activities that you normally feel joy in doing, um, disproportionate anger, right? So, like feelings of the anger are just extreme compared to the situation itself. And like when it starts to affect your work, um,
Mhm.
or just or daily tasks at home, um, when you're feeling anxious or you're worried, you have constant worry, or and being just easily irritable.
Mhm.
And sometimes it's even like the fear of leaving the house, right?
Right.
And I think that goes, and I've also seen like that's also another pattern that I've seen in some of these that what they'll post too, where it's like, I'm afraid of taking my child out in public because I'm not
Mhm.
sure how I can deal with the outbursts in public,
Mhm.
that kind of thing. So it's like, and then over time, it's like the fear of leaving the house. So then you just stay inside and you start to withdraw
Right.
yourself.
Yep.
So, so anyway, so those are just some of the signs that, to look for where you're thinking maybe I should get some help.
Yeah. So I was sharing with you that when I started the episode with um Ying and Kang, I did not anticipate them sharing about the suicidal ideation. So that would be a for sure sign right? Or indication like, oh, I need help, right? I think I need professional help to help me navigate these feelings, right? Of when I come to the point where I think that because I can't handle the stress or the things that having to do with the autism, to rephrase their words was, 这种的用语多, right? Like that, like
Hmm.
that's when you know, like, okay, I think, and maybe it's just one time, even if just one time, it should signal like, okay, I think I need help, right?
Yes, and and ideally you would want to be able to seek help before you get to a point of
Mm-hmm.
having suicidal ideations.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, but that's absolutely like a, a sign, a warning sign for
Yeah,
absolutely seeking help outside of your family or outside of yourself. Um, yeah, and when I heard that, I just felt, in the previous episode, I was so heartbroken for them.
I know.
You know,
Same, same.
yeah,
I
yeah.
just kept thinking, gosh, if only one person had reached in. We talk so much about, and I'll say it too in the groups. I'm like, reach out if you need something, right? Because you never want to impose what you do or who you are or anything unless they're willing or ready or wanting that support. I feel like it's not enough to just tell people to reach out, but we need to start reaching in and being like, hey, here's what I can do. I know maybe you're not ready for this, but this is what I know. This is what I can share with you. When you're ready, let me know. But like reaching in, because I wonder if just one person had reached in and said, hey, are you guys okay? We haven't seen you in a while.
Hmm.
It's just normal. Then they look, or, when we do see you, you guys look, I think you're not sleeping. If someone had just reached in, right? And they felt like they had a lifeline, right? So I think about that when I heard their story. I thought, gosh, if just one person, whether a family member or even a person on the street or any member of the clinical staff that they were meeting with throughout these 5 years, had just reached in and said, everything's okay. Right.
Hmm.
And so, and before I move to the next question, though, I do want to point out that you had mentioned that, therapy isn't for everyone. Right.
Hmm.
And you have to do the work. So, what's an option then if you say that therapy isn't for everyone? Is there something else comparable or are there other options?
Like, what options do families have if therapy is not
Mm-hmm.
for them, or if they're not comfortable with seeking therapy? Um, is finding support groups,
Okay.
right? Just
Yes.
like exactly
Mm-hmm.
like what you've created, right? Where it's just
Mm-hmm.
um, finding support groups like that where you can join in anonymously,
Yeah.
if you're not open to um, you know to using, to actually coming out and using who telling you who you are, but being able to still participate anonymously, and then also being able to read what other people are going through. I think just knowing that you're not alone is very helpful.
Yeah.
So I just wanted
For
to just add
sure.
that in there too. Yeah. Therapy itself is, it's one option in addition to the seeking help specifically for your child, because I believe that
Mhm.
one of the things that you had mentioned, and I'm not, I don't know a lot about the just the services for specifically for autism
Yeah.
and how that actually in the process and how that actually works. But I believe that you had mentioned that um, the autism, the services that you know of that you guys provide, is you realizing that it just providing services for the child is not
Mhm.
enough, right?
Right. Yep.
Because and I love that point that you made, where it's like it's not enough for that, because you can actually work with the child on skills, but then when they go home, what
Mhm.
happens then if there aren't services to support the families? um,
Exactly.
and so and so I think options for that, I think it's, and to tell me if this is correct, but I'm sure that, let's say, if in fact um, the example of Yang and Kang, if they were to actually come to, let's say that they're dropping their child off for services, or they brought their child for services, if
Mhm.
they were to actually express how they were feeling at the time, there would be somebody there to actually assist them with um, finding services for them to assist them, right?
Yeah, so in conjunction with the services that we provide for the kiddo, right? That's just your direct therapy, then
Mhm.
the BCBA. these, who supervises the case would also provide caregiver training also on those same goals, right? Because, like I said, we want to make sure generalization is happening, whatever their kiddo is learning, with their staff, that they can do it for their staff and their parents, or their staff in their school, right? So that's what my role will be, is to train the parents. But then throughout the course of the caregiver training, you do have those conversations like, how are things going? How can I support? And then if they did, share information about their mental health needs, I will make that positive referral, right, to some a
Yeah.
licensed mental health professionals. So that's how that would work.
Mm,
But yeah, that should already be happening. But like I said, in this specific scenario, like there was no contact, or maybe contact was minimal. When we talk about quality of care and being culturally responsive, right? Because you're Hmong, right? And we are
mm,
Hmong daughters, we're Hmong sisters, we're Hmong women. We grew up in this culture, and we recognize, like you said, you can't change a culture, but you can change yourself. So let's talk about, let's say if you are fortunate to live in a very Hmong concentrated area, and more Hmong professionals than Dao Shiba, right? Do you feel that having those Hmong professionals providing service coordination would have made a difference in the eventual outcome of services? And I was saying earlier too about a service coordinator, that's like your first point of contact once your pediatrician has given you that diagnosis, right? Or has made that referral. That service coordinator is going to say, hey, so you live in this area, here's what's available. These are the clinics that serve, provide the service that you need. Let's talk about funding. Let me help you with getting those applications in. What if that person is not culturally responsive to and we know that for our Hmong families, we need a little bit of a push, right? We need someone that's going to
mm,
be very like straight and to the point with us. They're not going to they're not going to give us this package in a very nicely, beautifully wrapped thing and say, it's your choice. Let me know what you feel. We need someone who's going to say, okay, join on it. Cái tình nhiều money nó
mm,
là cái yêu chuộng nó, you cái chuộng nó chỉ thử những món nó không tới cho New York, bông cá mình gì, etc., etc., etc. And so, like, with your Hmong families, right? So yeah, you're the kind of you're the you're like, not you know, you're good, yeah. But you the mean you're like, and they rely on you to advocate for them and make decisions for them, and you have a blasé approach. It might be a little bit tougher. So service coordinators, if they're not culturally aware of what Hmong people's responses are like to that paradigm, they're going to get lost unless they're advocating for themselves, right? So I guess my question is, like, just and I know you've worked in the Minnesota area too, and so I'm going to be very honest. I have not had very much contact with Hmong clientele. I've had just the one, and it was a very unique experience. But I'm curious to know, like, does it make a difference having Hmong professionals guiding your service that would lead to a better outcome in terms of quality of care?
the quick answer would be
Hmm.
absolutely, right?
Sure.
And I haven't worked, um, again, specifically within like the autism community,
Hmm.
but I have worked. I've actually worked 12 years within like the hospital system,
Yeah.
and where I worked in hospitals in the city,
Okay.
in Twin Cities, where we do have a lot of Hmong families that come through, and yes, I think having somebody who understands the culture and also understanding the medical side of it, I think it's helpful.
Yeah.
And I wanted to point that out. Like I think it's helpful when the Hmong or whoever the service coordinator is have an understanding of both sides,
Right.
right? It can't just be one-sided. I think,
Sure.
and for the medical side, we have, especially when it comes down to a something like a complex medical or a serious medical condition. Let's just say, example, one of the things that we normally get a lot are, I would say a lot, but things that have come up um, for me would be, having a young Hmong person, individual, a patient that was diagnosed with kidney failure,
Okay.
right? Even though the patient is in their, mid-20s, married, right,
Hmm.
have children, um, the answer is normally we can't make a decision until we talk with our elders,
Right.
right?
Yes.
And for the and my role in all of this is usually like trying to explain to the physicians um, why that is,
Mhm.
um, and then also trying to explain to the family, the patient and the family, what the implications would be.
Right.
Um, and the common theme around this, every scenario, like similar situation, is fear, right?
Okay.
It's fear based, meaning that I think, again, it's like it goes back to um, our parents' coping skills, right?
Mhm.
They they didn't they they don't speak the language, they don't read and write, and they could only assume, like it's just the assumptions of what they think the doctors are meaning, or assuming what the information they're given means to them. um, and so there's, that fear base of like, we have to protect ourselves. We cannot trust people who we don't know. We can't trust what we don't understand. We can only trust what we know.
Mhm.
And I think that's where like a lot of that comes from. So I think, yes, to answer your question, is absolutely. I think having somebody who is culturally responsive, understanding the Hmong culture, and also then understanding the other side of things, and to be able to explain both sides. And you're exactly right too. It's not, I think, being subtle, right? Being
Mhm.
subtle is doesn't work in our culture, right?
Yeah.
It has to be like very straightforward. Of this is what's going to happen if you don't do this.
Mhm.
Um, you know, Wanting to point out that there's so much good in community, right?
Yes, of course,
There's
yeah.
so much good in community, and just for myself, like um, there's so much that I love, like the rich
Yeah.
culture that we have.
Mhm.
But then again, like just like you, Tia, like I find myself a lot of times where like I start to feel overwhelmed, and you know, and then it takes me a bit to then snap out of it and realize, wait, I I'm, like I'm like almost 40, and like I have a choice. I can make
Mhm.
decisions,
Yeah.
right? Like it's
Yes.
because again, it's like it's so ingrained in us, and
Yeah.
that's like the response, like the automatic responses that we do. It's like we think about our family first, or
Mhm.
constantly. And but yeah, I mean but it is it's such a freeing feeling when you realize that yes, you can make decisions for yourself and what's best for
Yes.
you and your family, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So we know that like going to therapy is not something that our parents would ever recommend or suggest because it's outside of their wheelhouse. But for hopefully our generation, I'm all about that. Like I feel like in general I'm a good listener, but there comes a point where I go, so I l- I'm here for you, but I think it's time that you consider, maybe seeking therapy, right? But we don't see that a lot in the Hmong community, or in the Hmong culture is just not, welcome to that idea. So then, what is your message for the Hmong community regarding how we view therapy and the benefits of seeking or receiving therapy, and like at what age is it appropriate to suggest therapy as a means of seeking help? We're post. Pandemic. And that was such a strange 2-3 years for all of us, right? And then we have children who are born those during those years, and socialization for them, it's so unlike anything we've ever seen before in this last century. And then for our young children who entered school at that time, they were going to school like you and I right now, talking over a computer. It's so different, y'all. And so, like, I mean, any time period is going to be a cause for um, needing help, seeking help. I mean, as we speak right now, there's stuff going on in the Middle East. There's always going to be something, right? So we can't say
Hmm.
there's ever a time where you don't need help. We always will. But then sometimes, like I said, even as well-meaning as we all are, within a home community, because like you said, it is such a rich culture in that, Geshipa, I have never seen anything like the Hmong community. And I think about this when I talk about like weddings, funerals, get together, New Year's, the abundance of food to feed
Hmm.
each other, right? Cái bài ito Hmong person lu
Mm.
birthday. For nito minyo yo ko mo ihyong na. Oh my gosh. Yala jisaka by Jada inamaki. That was not a Hmong function, right? So I love that, right? About our Hmong community. It's, like we're refugees, but man, once we got here and figured it out, the sense of community was just as beautiful and even more extravagant. And so with that, where we are lacking then is that support when we realize, oh, here's my limitations, right? That's for your heart and in your mind, right? That's where I feel like for us, our generation, we're more adept to say, I love you. I've listened to you as much as I can, but this is the point where I would say, hey, I think you need professional help, right? So how do we navigate that in our conversations?
I think it's easier to understand it, I think, if you we compare it to that of like of medical cares,
Okay.
right? Where let's say, for example, you broke your arm or you
Mm-hmm.
broke your leg,
Yeah.
right? What do? Right. And I think
Mm-hmm.
for all of us, I think we can say, okay, so if my leg's broken or my arm's broken,
Yeah.
and I know I need my arm and my leg to be able to care for my family, to go to work, to, like we would go to the hospital or go to the doctor and get an x-ray done
Yeah.
and do what it takes in order to help with the pain and also help putting ourselves back together, right?
Yeah.
I think it's harder to see that with mental health because it's invisible. It is not something where
Yes.
we can actually see. And so I think that's where it's hard. But I think it's we need to start looking at our mental health the same way as we do our physical health. You know, if
Yes.
if we
100%.
start to yeah, if we start to feel as though like we can't care for ourselves, that's the same thing as when you're
Right.
having a broken leg. You can't care for yourself, you can't care for your family, you know. And so I think that's easier to understand. I think because again, it's like when it's invisible and when other people can't see it, like we can put on a face. We can say, "Oh, think everything's okay," right?
Mm-hmm.
Kind of, going back to like Yang and Kang, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
um, because however they were feeling weren't being seen right in front of them with like with
Mm-hmm.
all the services that they were receiving. It was hard to actually see that they were struggling unless they were
Right.
to able to say something or somebody was to actually um, check in with them. Um, so anyway, so I think we need to start viewing our mental health the same way as our physical health, right? And
Absolutely.
yeah, and as far as like what age is appropriate to suggest
Mm-hmm.
seeking help, I think at any age,
Yeah.
like I mean, it could be as early as like 1 to 2 years old, depending on like whatever event that's happening, and even those who are well into like their 60s and 70s and 80s,
Mm-hmm.
like if it's something that if it's affecting your life on your everyday daily tasks and such, it's okay to seek help, no matter how old you are, right?
For sure. Yeah. So, sure, I'm going to wrap this up by just praising you and bragging on you. You have recently opened up your private practice there in Minnesota. I'm so
I
excited
have.
for you. I think at some point in your career, right, you go, okay, I've gained all the tools. What's next? And I think, hopefully this is the next chapter for you. And tell me a little bit more about what your practice is called and then also the steps to finding a therapist. If they're not in Minnesota, unfortunately, listeners, 약간 Minnesota, kasi到说塔一个啥, but if you're not, then you just have to move to Minnesota for now. But what are the steps to finding a therapist if you're not in Minnesota?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I recently just opened my practice. It's called Embracing Possibility Counseling. And right now I'm providing this all online therapy. So it's,
Yeah.
of course it's just, I think since COVID, it's a great and a
Yes.
convenient option, right? Where you
Yeah.
can, wherever you are. But but if you don't live in in Minnesota, there's you could. I think the first thing I always advocate for, tell people that they need to advocate for themselves, because the more that you know, the more that you can advocate for
Yeah.
yourself. And I think think first and foremost, I think if you deciding on whether you're wanting to use your health insurance, for
Okay.
most people, I think most people would want to utilize their health insurance, which makes
Right.
sense. But there are lots of different platforms now online where you can actually find a therapist. But one of the big ones is Psychology Today,
Okay.
that where you can actually go and you can actually then filter where you're from, what you're looking for, even down to like whether or not, you want a female therapist, a male
Yeah.
therapist to, or that if you want a culturally responsive therapist,
Okay.
all of that. And then, pops up a list where you could actually then, you can also then filter through whether they accept your insurance as well.
I'm just curious, can you also filter, like, by ethnicity at this point, or is that too specific?
I think that's too specific for now.
Okay. For now, yeah.
Yeah, and and also like and I think it's great, it's wonderful that that especially here in Minnesota, like I
Mhm.
know we have a lot of or at least the number of Hmong clinicians have increased, and I know in North Carolina, they're starting to be Hmong clinicians in North Carolina as well. Shout out to my cousin Sylvia May, who's been helping me out
Yes.
with my private practice. Hey, Sylvia. So yeah, so and I'm sure that in California they have a good number of
Yes.
Hmong clinicians as well. But I think it's too soon to actually be able to filter through ethnicity. Yeah.
Okay, and I also wanna just, piggyback on that and say Wisconsin too. I've seen a big boom there, and
Absolutely.
in
Hmm.
fact, I saw through one of the nonprofits, they have, like, a directory, right,
Yes.
clinicians. So, I mean, I think the more we can all kinda, like, pull our resources in one place, because that's half the struggle is knowing where to start, y'all, where to look,
Yeah.
and that's not to say that if you live in an area aging with home clinicians, then don't go. Like, continue to look. You never know with mental health. And I say this, someone just asked me the other day, they said, we're not exactly enjoying our clinician. And I said, ask for a new one. You have that
Hmm.
right to ask for a new person because
Yes.
one, that's your time. Two, that's your money. Three, we want you to be successful too. And if that pairing is just not right, it's totally okay to ask for a new one. And maybe you find that, you know what, yung home that I don't like to talk to another home person. I want
Hmm.
someone that's not Mo, someone
Absolutely.
or vice versa, whatever. We just want everyone to be well. So whatever that looks like, just know that the resources are there, know where to start. So yeah, sure. Thank you so much. It was so good to catch up, and we'll
Yes.
have to get together. I know in collaboration with the Hmong North Carolina Women's Association. There are more mental health awareness and wellness things coming down the pipeline. So, listeners, please continue to be on the lookout for that. And know that if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to Shul at Embracing Possibilities Counseling, right? And
Yes.
you can also reach out to me and I can direct you wherever you need to go. So, thank you so much, Shul. I appreciate you and your time and your expertise.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Tia. It was so good to collaborate with you.
Yes, yes. Thank you.